The boss's mother froze when she saw her lost daughter's ring on the nurse's hand. The afternoon sun was falling over the Holloway mansion like liquid gold, painting the hills of Santa Barbara in shades of amber and rose. Eleanor Holloway walked slowly down the hallway of the private medical wing, her footsteps muted against the polished marble floors. At 50, she carried herself with the kind of quiet dignity that only comes from years of bearing invisible weight, the kind of grief that doesn't announce itself, but settles into your bones until it becomes part of who you are. Her son, Nathan, had collapsed 3 weeks ago. 30 years old, brilliant, driven to the point of breaking. He'd built an empire in Silicon Valley, but somewhere along the way he'd forgotten how to sleep, how to eat, how to be human. The doctors called it a nervous breakdown. Eleanor called it what happens when you run from your ghosts for too long. She'd hired a day nurse, someone gentle, the agency had promised, someone with a soft voice and steady hands. Emily Carter was her name, and she'd started just yesterday. Eleanor pushed open the door to Nathan's room, carrying a silver tray with chamomile tea and honey, his favorite when he was a boy, back before the world taught him that softness was weakness. But the moment she stepped inside, something stopped her cold. Emily was adjusting Nathan's pillows, her movements careful and practiced. The late afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, catching on something on her right hand, a ring, silver, delicate, with a small emerald carved into the shape of a star. The tray slipped from Eleanor's fingers. The crash echoed through the room, porcelain shattering, tea spreading across the floor in a dark, steaming pool. Emily spun around, startled. "Mrs. Holloway, are you okay?" But Eleanor couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Her eyes were locked on that ring, and suddenly she was somewhere else entirely. 20 years in the past, standing in a small artisan shop in San Diego with 2 small children tugging at her skirt. She'd commissioned those rings herself, 2 of them, identical, each one crafted by hand. One for Nathan, who was 10 and so serious even then. One for Clara, her baby girl, who was only 5 and still believed in magic. Twin stars, the jeweler had called them. Inseparable, until Clara disappeared. "Where?" Eleanor's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Where did you get that ring?" Emily looked down at her hand, confused. I've had it since I can remember, ma'am. The woman who raised me. She gave it to me." Eleanor's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "What woman?" "Mrs. Rose." Emily's voice softened, the way it always did when she talked about the woman who'd raised her. "She passed away 3 years ago." The room tilted. Eleanor reached for the doorframe to steady herself. It was a gray October day when it happened. One of those California afternoons where the marine layer rolls in and everything feels muted, like the world is holding its breath. Eleanor had taken the kids to an outdoor market in Los Angeles, one of those sprawling weekend affairs with vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handmade jewelry to God knows what else. She'd only looked away for a second, maybe 2. Clara had been right there, holding her hand, and then she'd spotted a balloon vendor, and Eleanor had turned to pay for apples, and gone, just gone. She'd screamed Clara's name until her voice gave out. Nathan had cried, terrified, clinging to her leg. Security had been called. Police had arrived. The market had been shut down. Every vendor questioned. Every corner searched. Nothing. For 6 months, Eleanor lived in a nightmare of false leads and cruel hope. There were supposed sightings, a little girl matching Clara's description in San Francisco, in Portland, in Seattle. None of them were her. The case went cold. The detectives moved on to newer tragedies. The file was archived. Eleanor fell apart quietly, the way women of a certain class are expected to. No screaming, no public breakdowns, just a slow dissolution, like sugar in water. Her husband Robert tried to hold them together, but grief is a heavy thing to carry, and 5 years later his heart just stopped. The doctors called it a heart attack. Eleanor knew better. Nathan grew up in the shadow of it all. He put his own ring, the twin star to Clara's, in a wooden box and locked it away, made himself hard, made himself successful, made himself into someone who didn't need anyone, because needing people meant losing them. And now, 20 years later, here was that ring on the hand of a stranger. "Mrs. Holloway," Emily's voice pulled her back. The girl looked worried now, uncertain. "Should I call someone? You look like you might faint." Eleanor forced herself to breathe. To think, No, I'm fine, that ring. It's unusual. Beautiful." Emily glanced at it, a sad smile crossing her face. "Mrs. Rose always said it was special, that I was wearing it when she found me." "Found you?" "At a bus station in Oakland. I was just a baby. No one came looking for me. So she took me in, raised me as her own." Emily's voice held that particular kind of sadness that comes from never quite knowing where you came from. "I don't know anything about my real family. This ring is the only thing I have from before." Eleanor's vision blurred with tears. She refused to let fall. Not yet. Not until she was sure. Because she couldn't let herself hope. Not again. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what had nearly destroyed her the first time. With every false sighting, every dead-end lead, every cruel twist that made her think, maybe, just maybe, "I should clean this up," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. She knelt down and started gathering pieces of broken china, grateful for something to do with her hands. Emily knelt beside her. "Here, let me help." "No." The word came out sharper than Eleanor intended. She softened it with a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "You're here to care for Nathan, not clean up after me." She watched Emily stand and return to Nathan's bedside. Watched the way she moved, the tilt of her head when she concentrated, something in the set of her jaw, the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking. Eleanor's breath caught. Clara used to do that exact thing, that night, after Emily had gone home to her small apartment somewhere in the valley. Eleanor sat in her study with a glass of wine she didn't drink and stared at the photo on her desk. Clara at 4, gap-toothed and grinning, wearing a purple dress she'd insisted was a princess gown. Nathan beside her, already so serious, already trying to be the man of the house even though he was just a kid himself. Eleanor picked up her phone 3 times before finally making the call. "I need a DNA test," she told her doctor. Discreet, private, as soon as possible. Because she had to know. Even if the knowing destroyed her, Eleanor couldn't sleep that night. Or the night after. She'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. And all she could see was that ring catching the light. By the 3rd day, she'd become a ghost, haunting her own home, drifting through hallways, lingering outside Nathan's room while Emily worked, watching, always watching. She told herself she was being subtle about it. She wasn't. Emily had this way of tilting her head when she listened, like she was trying to hear something beneath the words. Clara used to do that. Emily frowned when she concentrated, that little crease between her eyebrows. Clara had done that too, and when Emily was nervous, she'd tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, over and over, the same compulsive gesture that Clara. Eleanor forced herself to stop. This was madness. She was seeing what she wanted to see, finding her daughter in the mannerisms of a stranger because the alternative, that Clara was truly gone forever, was still too much to bear. But that ring, God, that ring, on the 4th night. Eleanor found herself standing outside the guest room where Emily slept. It was past midnight. The house was silent except for the distant sound of the ocean and her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She shouldn't do this. It was a violation, crossing every boundary of privacy and decency. But her hand was already on the doorknob, turning it slowly, pushing the door open just enough to slip inside. The room was dark except for a sliver of moonlight through the curtains. Emily was asleep, her breathing soft and even. Eleanor stood there for a moment, feeling like an intruder in her own home, before she spotted what she was looking for. A small duffel bag in the corner, Emily's few belongings tucked inside. Eleanor's hands shook as she knelt beside it. This was wrong. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't stop herself. Inside the bag, beneath a couple of worn sweaters and a dog-eared paperback, she found a tin box, the kind that might have once held cookies or tea. The metal was scratched and faded, the lid dented on one side. Eleanor lifted it carefully, holding her breath as she pried it open. Photos, a rosary with wooden beads, a pressed flower, brittle with age, and beneath it all, a letter. The paper was yellowed and soft, folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had begun to tear. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it, angling it toward the moonlight to read the shaky handwriting. To my found little girl, Emily. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. I'm sorry for so many things. I found you crying in a bus station in Oakland 20 years ago. Just a tiny thing. Couldn't have been more than 5 years old. You were alone. No one watching you. No one came looking. I waited for hours, thinking someone would show up, frantic and searching. But nobody did. When the police came, I told them I'd take you to the station, file a report. Instead, I took you home. I know that was wrong. I know I should have turned you in. Let the system find your people. But Emily, you looked at me with those big, sad eyes and something in my heart just broke open. I'd lost my own daughter years before, and suddenly there you were, like God was giving me a second chance. I raised you the best I could, loved you like you were my own flesh and blood, but I always knew you came from somewhere else, from someone else. That ring you wore, I never took it off your finger. I figured someday it might lead you back to where you belonged. If I did wrong, I hope you can forgive me. I hope whoever lost you can forgive me too. I was selfish, but I loved you. Emily, I loved you so damn much. Your Rose Eleanor's vision blurred. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable, dripping onto the letter. She pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. Oakland, 20 years ago. A 5-year-old girl. It fit. God help her. It all fit. Los Angeles to Oakland wasn't that far. A 6-hour drive, maybe 7. If someone had taken Clara, if they'd gotten scared and abandoned her at a bus station. Eleanor carefully folded the letter and put everything back exactly as she'd found it. Her hands were still shaking as she closed the tin box. As she tucked it back into the duffel bag, she stood and took one last look at Emily sleeping peacefully, one arm thrown over her head, her face soft and unguarded in the darkness. Please, Eleanor thought, please let it be her. She slipped out of the room as quietly as she'd entered. Back in her own bedroom, Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed and let herself fall apart, silent, shaking sobs that felt like they were tearing her open from the inside out. She cried for Clara, for Robert, for Nathan growing up too fast and too hard. She cried for Mrs. Rose, who'd loved a child that wasn't hers, and taken that secret to the grave. She cried for Emily, who'd spent 25 years not knowing who she really was. And she cried for herself, for the woman she'd been before that gray October day, before her world had shattered into before and after. When the tears finally stopped, Eleanor washed her face and stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her face looked older than it had just a week ago. She thought about that day at the market, how she'd been distracted for just a moment, just long enough, how she'd turned back and Clara was gone, swallowed up by the crowd, how she'd screamed until her throat bled, how Nathan had clung to her, terrified, asking over and over where his sister had gone. The police had questions, so many questions. They'd looked at Eleanor like maybe she'd done something, like maybe this perfect tragedy was too perfect. They'd cleared her eventually, but the suspicion had lingered. She could see it in their eyes, in the way the detective spoke to her with that careful, neutral tone. Robert had never been the same after Clara. He'd thrown himself into work, stayed at the office later and later. Not because he blamed Eleanor. He never said he did anyway. But because being home meant confronting the empty bedroom, the toys gathering dust, the phantom sound of a little girl's laughter echoing through the halls when his heart gave out 5 years later. Eleanor had felt almost relieved, guilty for feeling it, but relieved all the same. At least he didn't have to carry the weight anymore. Nathan had been 15, old enough to understand that his father was gone, young enough to still need one. But Eleanor had been so lost in her own grief that she'd barely noticed her son hardening into someone she didn't quite recognize. By the time she looked up, really looked, he was already gone, physically present, but emotionally 1,000 miles away. He'd left for college at 16, early admission to Stanford, made his first million at 23, built an empire by 30, crashed and burned at 30, and now he was upstairs, sleeping fitfully under the care of a young woman who might be his sister. Eleanor picked up her phone and called Dr. Harrison. "I need you to do something for me," she said when he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Tomorrow, When Emily comes in, I need you to convince her to do a routine blood panel. Don't tell her why. Just make it sound standard. Eleanor, please, James. I need to know. There was a long pause. Then, 1 week? That's how long the DNA results will take. 1 week, Eleanor repeated. 7 days. She could survive 7 days. She had to. Margaret Holloway had always believed that patience was a virtue, best practiced by those who had nothing better to do. She herself preferred a more direct approach to getting what she wanted. Calculation disguised as concern, manipulation wrapped in silk. At 58, Margaret had perfected the art of appearing indispensable while being entirely self-serving. She'd moved into the mansion after her brother Robert's death, ostensibly to help Eleanor through her grief. In reality, she'd seen an opportunity. With Clara gone and Nathan emotionally distant, she'd positioned herself as the family's anchor, the voice of reason, the one who'd be there when everyone else fell apart. It had worked beautifully, for years, until now. Margaret stood in the hallway outside Nathan's room, pretending to arrange flowers in a vase while watching Eleanor through the half-open door. Her sister-in-law had been acting strange all week, distracted, jumpy, staring at that nurse girl like she'd seen a ghost, actually, Margaret thought with bitter amusement. That's exactly what Eleanor looked like. Someone who'd seen a ghost. Mrs. Holloway seems tired lately, Margaret said that evening to Rosa, the head housekeeper. They were in the kitchen, Rosa preparing dinner while Margaret sipped wine and gathered intelligence. Have you noticed? Rosa, who'd been with the family for 20 years, nodded carefully. She hasn't been sleeping well, I think. And she's been spending a lot of time with the new nurse, Emily, is it? See, very sweet girl, that one. Very gentle with Mr. Nathan. Margaret made a sympathetic noise. I hope Eleanor isn't... Well, you know how she can be. Sometimes I worry her grief makes her see things that aren't there. Rosa's face softened with concern. You think she's not well? I think, Margaret said delicately, that losing Clara broke something in her, and sometimes broken things never quite heal right. She paused, letting the words sink in. If you notice anything unusual, you'll tell me, won't you? I just want to make sure she's okay. Rosa promised she would. And Margaret smiled warmly before retreating to her suite with her wine. Phase 1, plant seeds of doubt. But 2 days later, Margaret's careful observations revealed something that made her blood run cold. She'd been walking past Dr. Harrison's office in the medical wing when she heard Eleanor's voice. Low and urgent, Margaret pressed herself against the wall, listening. Absolutely discreet. No one can know. Eleanor, are you sure about this? That was Dr. Harrison, sounding concerned. A DNA test is... I have to know, James, please. Margaret's heart lurched. DNA test? Why would Eleanor need... And then it clicked. The staring. The obsessive attention to Emily. The way Eleanor watched the girl's every movement like she was searching for something. No. Margaret gripped the wall to steady herself. Eleanor thought the nurse was Clara. She actually believed that after 20 years, her daughter had somehow miraculously reappeared as a grown woman taking care of Nathan. It was insane, impossible, and if it was true, Margaret's entire life was about to collapse. She'd spent 15 years positioning herself as Nathan's closest family, the one who'd inherit when he inevitably worked himself to death, or Eleanor finally succumbed to her grief. She'd been patient, playing the long game, and now this nobody from nowhere might be about to steal everything. Margaret returned to her room and locked the door. She needed to think. If the test came back positive, Emily Carter would instantly become an heir to the Holloway fortune. Nathan would have his sister back. Eleanor would have her daughter, and Margaret. Margaret would be nothing, replaceable, expendable, unless she did something about it. The next morning, Nathan cornered his mother in the breakfast room. Margaret watched from the doorway, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. Mom. Nathan's voice was tight, controlled. Rosa said some things yesterday that worried me. And then I heard from Marcus. Marcus was one of the estate's security staff. He said you've been asking questions about Emily, background checks, family history. Eleanor set down her teacup with a soft clink. Nathan, and Margaret's been spreading rumors, says you're losing it, that you think Emily is Clara. His voice cracked on his sister's name. Mom, please tell me that's not true. The silence stretched out. painful and electric. "I don't know what I think," Eleanor said finally, "but I saw something. Something that made me wonder." "Wonder what?" Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She showed him a photo, a close-up of Emily's hand. The ring glinted in the light, the emerald star unmistakable. Nathan's face went white. "That's identical to the rings I had made." "Yes, but it could be a coincidence. There must be hundreds of rings like that. Made by a small artisan in San Diego, custom designed, 2 matching sets, no others." Eleanor's voice was steady now. "Stronger? Nathan, I found a letter. Emily was found abandoned at a bus station in Oakland 20 years ago. A 5-year-old girl. No one claimed her." Nathan sat down heavily. His hands were shaking. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, the one he'd kept locked away for 2 decades. Inside was his ring, the twin star. He set it on the table next to the photo of Emily's. They were identical. "Jesus," Nathan whispered. "Jesus Christ, Mom." Margaret's coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Both Eleanor and Nathan turned to look at her. Margaret forced herself to smile, to look shocked and sympathetic rather than terrified. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Eleanor, do you really think—" "I'm having a DNA test done," Eleanor said. "We'll know in a week." A week. Margaret had a week to make sure that test never revealed the truth. That night, while the rest of the house slept, Margaret made a phone call to a man she'd met years ago at a charity function, the kind of man who knew how to make problems disappear for the right price. "I need information on a private lab," she said. "Specifically, I need to know who's handling DNA samples for Dr. James Harrison, and then I need you to have a conversation with them." "What kind of conversation?" "The kind that ends with certain results being adjusted." There was a pause. "That'll cost you." "Money isn't an issue. When do you need this done?" Margaret looked out her window at the dark California hills. "Before the end of the week, and it needs to be clean. No traces back to me." "Consider it done." Margaret ended the call and poured herself another glass of wine. Her hands weren't quite steady, but that was fine. By this time next week, Emily Carter would just be a nurse who briefly worked for the Holloway family. Nothing more. And Margaret would still be exactly where she belonged, at the center of everything. Indispensable and secure. She raised her glass to the darkness. "To family," she murmured, "and to making sure it stays exactly as it should be." The week that followed was the longest of Eleanor's life. She'd thought nothing could be worse than those first months after Clara disappeared. The sleepless nights, the phone calls that led nowhere, the false hope that shattered her over and over again. But this was different. This was knowing that in 7 days, she'd have an answer, one way or another. The not knowing would end. That should have been a comfort. It wasn't Dr. Harrison had done his part beautifully. He'd brought Emily into his office on day 2, all professional concern, and explained that since she'd be working in close proximity to Nathan during his recovery, it would be prudent to run a full health screening. Standard protocol, he'd assured her. Nothing to worry about. Emily had agreed without suspicion. Why wouldn't she? She had no reason to think that the vial of blood drawn from her arm would be sent to a private lab with instructions to compare it against DNA samples Eleanor had provided from Nathan's childhood medical records, and by extension, her own. Now it was day 4, and Eleanor felt like she was coming apart at the seams. She found herself gravitating toward Nathan's room more often than necessary, inventing excuses to bring tea, to check the temperature, to ask if the curtains should be opened or closed. Really, she just wanted to watch Emily, to study her, to find Clara in the curve of her smile, or the way she laughed. "You know," Emily said one afternoon, "Mrs. Rose used to do that." Eleanor had been standing in the doorway, lost in thought, staring at Emily as she helped Nathan sit up to eat lunch. "Do what? Watch me like that?" Like she was trying to memorize my face. Emily's smile was gentle, without accusation. She'd get this faraway look, like she was seeing someone else. Eleanor's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to stare." "It's okay." Emily arranged the pillows behind Nathan's back. "I figure you're thinking about your daughter. Nathan told me about her. About Clara." The name hung in the air like a held breath. Nathan glanced at his mother, worry creasing his forehead. They'd agreed not to tell Emily about the test until they had results. No point in building hope. Or worse, making her feel like some kind of experiment. I think about her every day, Eleanor admitted. It wasn't a lie. She'd be your age now, 25. Emily nodded. I can't imagine what that must be like, not knowing. But maybe you do know, Eleanor thought. Maybe you've spent your whole life not knowing where you came from, who your real parents were, why you were left alone in that bus station. Tell me about Mrs. Rose, Eleanor said instead. She settled into the chair by the window, genuinely curious now. What was she like? Emily's face softened the way it always did when she talked about the woman who'd raised her. She sat down on the edge of Nathan's bed, her hands folded in her lap. She was warm. That's the word that always comes to mind. Like sunshine, you know. She worked as a seamstress. We didn't have much money, but she could make magic with a needle and thread. She'd make me dresses out of old curtains and bed sheets, and somehow they'd look like something a princess would wear. Eleanor smiled, despite the ache in her chest. Clara had loved playing princess. She'd wear her purple gown, really just a cheap Halloween costume, around the house for days on end, refusing to take it off even to sleep. She taught me to sew, Emily continued. Said every woman should know how to mend what's broken, whether it's clothes or hearts. She laughed softly. She was full of sayings like that. Country wisdom, I guess. She grew up in Kentucky, moved to California after her husband died. Did she ever talk about finding you? Emily's smile faded slightly. Sometimes, especially toward the end, when she knew she was dying, she'd get this guilty look and start apologizing. Said she should have turned me over to the authorities, that she'd been selfish keeping me, but I never saw it that way. She saved me, loved me. That's what mattered. She sounds like a good person, Eleanor said softly. She was. The best. Emily touched the ring on her finger. That familiar, unconscious gesture. This ring was the only thing I had when she found me. She never let me take it off. Said it was important, that someday it might help me find my way home. Eleanor had to look away, blinking back tears. Nathan, who'd been quiet through this whole exchange, spoke up. Do you want to find them? Your birth family? Emily was quiet for a moment. I used to, when I was younger. I'd make up stories. Maybe my parents were secret agents, or royalty, or amnesia victims who were desperately searching for me. She smiled sadly. But as I got older, I realized the truth was probably simpler and sadder. Maybe they couldn't keep me. Maybe they didn't want me. Either way, they let me go. Mrs. Rose was the one who stayed. What if they never meant to let you go? Nathan's voice was intense, almost urgent. What if you were taken, lost? What if they've been looking for you all this time? Emily looked at him strangely. That's a nice thought, but I think I'd rather believe Mrs. Rose was meant to find me, that everything happened the way it was supposed to. Eleanor stood abruptly. I should let you eat in peace. She moved toward the door, needing to escape before she said something she'd regret. Mrs. Holloway? She turned back. Emily was watching her with those eyes. Clara's eyes, or maybe just the eyes of a kind young woman who'd seen her share of sadness. Thank you, Emily said, for letting me share that. I don't talk about Mrs. Rose much anymore. It feels good to remember her out loud. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice, and left the room. She made it to her own suite before the tears came. She sat on her bed and let herself cry quietly, one hand pressed to her mouth to muffle the sound. 3 more days. She could survive 3 more days. That evening, Margaret knocked on her door. I brought you some tea, she said. All false concern and poisoned honey. You look exhausted, Eleanor. You really should try to rest. I'm fine. Are you? Margaret set the tea on the nightstand and sat down uninvited. Because the staff is worried. Rosa says you're barely eating. Marcus says you're wandering the halls at night. And that business with the DNA test. That's none of your concern. It is, if you're making yourself sick over nothing. Margaret's voice was gentle, but her eyes were cold. Eleanor, I know you want to believe, but after 20 years, the chances of Clara being alive, let alone showing up here as your son's nurse. She shook her head. Sometimes grief makes us see what we want to see, and sometimes, Eleanor said quietly, grief makes us recognize what we thought we'd lost forever. Margaret stood. I hope you're right. For your sake, I really do. But I also hope you're prepared for the alternative." After she left, Eleanor poured the tea down the bathroom sink. 3 more days. She could survive 3 more days. She had to. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. 7 days after the blood had been drawn. 7 days of Eleanor barely sleeping, barely eating, existing in a state of suspended animation where every phone call might be the one that changed everything. Dr. Harrison delivered it himself, his face carefully neutral as he handed it to Eleanor in her study. "Are you sure you want to open this alone?" he asked. Eleanor's hands trembled as she took the envelope. It was thin, plain white paper with the lab's logo embossed in the corner. Her entire future, or past, or both, reduced to whatever was printed on the pages inside. "Yes," she said. "I need to." He nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. Eleanor sat at her desk for a long moment, just holding the envelope. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it, after 20 years of not knowing, of wondering, of waking up every single day with that hollow ache of absence. This was the moment that would either fill that void or confirm that it could never be filled. She opened the envelope. The technical language swam before her eyes. Alleles and markers and probability percentages. She skipped past all of it, searching for the conclusion, the definitive statement that would tell her what she needed to know. And there it was, 3 words in bold type. No genetic match found. The paper slipped from Eleanor's fingers. No match, no connection. No Clara. Emily Carter was just Emily Carter. A kind young woman who happened to wear a ring that looked like another ring from 20 years ago. A coincidence. Nothing more. Eleanor heard a sound, realized dimly that it was coming from her own throat. A low, keening wail of grief that she couldn't contain. She pressed her hands to her face and sobbed. Great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She'd been so sure. The ring, the timing, the way Emily moved and spoke and smiled. It had all lined up so perfectly. But genetics didn't lie. Science didn't care about desperate hopes or mother's intuition. Clara was still gone, still lost, still never coming home. The door burst open. Nathan rushed in, his face pale. Mom, what happened? I heard..." He saw the paper on the floor and picked it up. "Read it." His face crumpled. "No," he whispered. "No, that can't be right." But it was right. It had to be. These tests didn't make mistakes. Eleanor couldn't speak, couldn't explain. She just sat there and cried while Nathan knelt beside her chair, his own eyes red and wet. Neither of them heard the soft knock on the study door. "Mrs. Holloway?" Emily's voice was quiet, hesitant. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Rosa said..." She stopped when she saw them. Eleanor looked up, and through her tears she saw Emily standing in the doorway, confused and concerned. And behind that concern, Eleanor saw the dawning realization. "The DNA test," Emily said slowly. "That wasn't just a routine screening, was it?" Eleanor couldn't lie, couldn't find the words to explain. Nathan stood, the test results still in his hand. "We thought..." he started, then stopped. "The ring you wear, it's identical to one our mother had made for my sister Clara before she disappeared 20 years ago. And you're the right age, and you were found abandoned in Oakland around the same time. And we thought maybe you thought I was her." Emily's voice was flat, not angry, just empty. "You thought I was your lost daughter. I'm so sorry," Eleanor managed. "I didn't mean to." "To what?" "To use me. To study me like some kind of specimen." Emily's hands were shaking. "All those conversations, all those questions about Mrs. Rose, about where I came from. You weren't being kind. You were investigating me." "No, Emily, that's not..." "And the blood test." Emily laughed, but it was a broken sound. "God, I'm so stupid. Routine screening. You took my blood to see if I was your daughter without even asking me first. We didn't want to give you false hope," Nathan said quietly. "False hope?" Emily's eyes flashed. "You didn't want to give me false hope. What about yours? What about your mother's?" She looked at Eleanor, and her expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm so sorry about your daughter. I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child, but I'm not her. I'm not Clara. I'm just nobody. Just Emily." The girl from nowhere who isn't special or important or anything except exactly what I've always been. Alone. That's not true, Eleanor said. I need to go. Emily was backing toward the door. I need to leave. This was a mistake. I should never have taken this job. Emily, please. I quit, Mrs. Holloway. I'm sorry, but I can't stay here. I can't be a constant reminder of the daughter you don't have. She turned and fled. Nathan started after her, but Eleanor grabbed his arm. Let her go. Mom, we can't force her to stay. We've already invaded her privacy, used her, hurt her. Eleanor's voice was hollow. We've done enough damage. Nathan sank back down, his head in his hands. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Nathan spoke. Something's wrong. What? The test. Something about it feels wrong. He picked up the paper again, studying it. Emily is the right age. She was found in the right place, at the right time. She has an identical ring that was custom made. What are the odds of all of that being coincidence? Apparently 100%, Eleanor said bitterly. The science doesn't lie, Nathan. Science can be manipulated. Eleanor looked at her son sharply. What are you saying? I'm saying Margaret has been acting strange, asking questions, spreading rumors, and she has the most to lose if Emily turns out to be Clara. Nathan. That's crazy, maybe, but so is everything else about this situation. He stood. I'm hiring a private investigator, someone who can look into the lab, verify these results. It won't change anything. Maybe not, but I need to know for sure. He paused at the door. Don't you? After he left, Eleanor picked up the test results and read them again. No genetic match found. She wanted to believe Nathan, wanted to believe there was still hope, still a chance. But hope was dangerous. Hope was what had nearly destroyed her the first time. She folded the paper carefully and put it in her desk drawer. Then she went to the window and watched Emily loading her few belongings into an old Honda in the driveway, watched her drive away without looking back. And Eleanor Holloway, who'd spent 20 years learning how to live with loss, discovered that somehow, impossibly, she'd just found a new way to break. Emily's apartment in San Jose was small, just a studio with a Murphy bed that folded into the wall and a kitchenette that barely qualified as such. But it was hers, paid for with her own work. And right now, it felt like the only safe place in the world. She'd been packing for 2 days. It didn't take long when you owned so little. A cardboard box held her books, mostly paperbacks with cracked spines, the kind you found at library sales. Another box had her clothes, carefully folded the way Mrs. Rose had taught her. The tin box with Mrs. Rose's letter sat on top, wrapped in one of the sweaters to keep it safe. Emily picked up the framed photo from her nightstand, the only picture she had of Mrs. Rose, taken a few months before she died. The old woman was smiling, her eyes crinkled with joy, despite the illness that was already eating away at her. Emily traced the frame with her finger. I wish you were here, she whispered. I wish I could ask you what to do. But Mrs. Rose was gone, and Emily was alone. Again, still, always. Her phone buzzed. Nathan. He'd been calling every few hours since she left. She'd ignored every call, every text. What was there to say? She'd been a science experiment, a potential solution to someone else's grief. The kindness, the tea, the gentle questions. All of it had been Eleanor searching for her daughter, not seeing Emily for who she actually was. Nobody ever really saw Emily. She was always just a placeholder for someone else's story. The phone buzzed again. She picked it up, intending to block the number, but hesitated when she saw it wasn't Nathan this time. It was a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered, Hello, Miss Carter? My name is David Chen. I'm a private investigator working for Nathan Holloway. I need to speak with you urgently about the DNA test results you received. Emily's stomach dropped. I don't want to talk about that. Please leave me alone. I understand, and I'm sorry to intrude, but there are irregularities with the lab that processed your samples. Specifically, financial transactions that suggest the results may have been compromised. What are you talking about? Someone paid the lab technician to falsify the results. I have bank records showing a transfer of $50,000 3 days before your results were delivered. The transfer came from an account belonging to Margaret Holloway. Emily sank onto her futon, the phone pressed to her ear. That doesn't make sense. Why would she? Because if you're Clara Holloway, Margaret loses her position as Nathan's closest living relative. She loses influence, inheritance, power. She had every reason to make sure that test came back negative, whether it was accurate or not. But the test said what Margaret paid for it to say. I need you to come back to Santa Barbara. Miss Carter, we need to run the test again, properly this time, in a federal lab where it can't be tampered with. Emily's head was spinning. I can't go through that again. Even if you're right, even if the first test was fake, what if the second one says the same thing? What if I'm really not Clara? And what if you are? David's voice was gentle. Don't you want to know? After he hung up, Emily sat in the silence of her apartment and thought about Mrs. Rose's letter. That ring you wore. I figured someday it might lead you back to where you belonged. Where she belonged. Emily had never belonged anywhere. Not really. She'd been loved. Yes. Mrs. Rose had made sure of that. But she'd always been the girl from nowhere. The foundling with no past. The mystery that would never be solved. What if it could be solved? What if she actually did belong somewhere? But the fear was overwhelming. The fear of hoping, of believing, only to have it ripped away again. She'd seen the devastation on Eleanor's face when she read those results. Emily couldn't bear to cause that kind of pain twice. Her phone buzzed again. Nathan, this time. She answered. Please don't hang up, he said immediately. Just give me 2 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Nathan, the investigator called you, I know. And I know you're scared. Hell, I'm scared too. But Emily, his voice cracked slightly. What if you're my sister? What if you've been right here this whole time, and we almost let you walk away because some bitter old woman paid off a lab tech? What if I'm not? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. What if we do this again? And the answer is the same. Your mother can't survive that twice. Neither can I. Then we'll deal with it together. But we have to know. Don't you see? Not knowing is worse. Not knowing means spending the rest of our lives wondering what if. Emily closed her eyes. She thought about the ring on her finger, the one she'd worn for 25 years without knowing what it meant. She thought about Eleanor's face when she first saw it, that moment of desperate hope. She thought about the way Nathan had looked at her sometimes, like he was seeing someone else, someone he'd lost. I need time, she said finally. How much time? I don't know. A day, maybe 2. I need to think. Okay. Nathan sounded relieved just to be talking to her. Okay, that's fair. But Emily, whatever happens, whatever the truth is, you're not nobody. You're not alone. You matter. Not because you might be Clara, but because you're you. I need you to know that. Emily's eyes burned with tears. I have to go. She ended the call and sat there in her tiny apartment, surrounded by boxes, trying to decide whether to run or stay, whether to risk everything on the possibility of belonging, or to protect herself by remaining exactly what she'd always been. Emily Carter, the girl from nowhere. Outside, the sun was setting over San Jose. Soon it would be dark. Emily stood and walked to the window. In the distance, she could see the lights of Silicon Valley beginning to glow. Beyond that, somewhere north, was Santa Barbara, the mansion on the hill. Eleanor, Nathan, maybe family, or maybe just another disappointment waiting to break her heart. She looked down at the ring on her finger. The emerald star caught the fading light, glinting like it had a secret to tell. That ring you wore. I figured someday it might lead you back to where you belonged. Okay, Mrs. Rose, Emily whispered. I hope you're right. She picked up her phone and called Nathan back. I'll do the test, she said. One more time. But if it comes back negative again, then we accept it and move forward. But at least we'll know we tried everything. When? Tomorrow? I've already arranged everything with a federal lab in Los Angeles. They'll have someone there to witness the sample collection. Chain of custody, the whole 9 yards. No way Margaret or anyone else can touch it. Emily looked around her apartment, at the boxes waiting to be loaded into her car, at the life she'd been preparing to leave behind. I'll be there, she said. After she hung up, She unpacked one of the boxes and pulled out a sweater. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not until she knew the truth. David Chen worked fast, in 72 hours. He'd traced Margaret's bank records, interviewed the lab technician who'd processed the original DNA test, and obtained a signed confession detailing exactly how much Margaret had paid him to swap the results. 50 grand, the technician had said, his hands shaking as he signed the affidavit. She said it was to protect the family from a con artist. I didn't think. I needed the money. My kids' medical bills. He'd broken down then, realizing he'd potentially destroyed a family for the cost of his daughter's chemotherapy. Nathan had wanted to prosecute. David had convinced him to wait. Get the real results first, he'd said. Make sure we're right about this. Then you can decide what to do with him. Now they stood in a federal testing facility in downtown Los Angeles. Nathan, Emily, and a court-appointed witness whose only job was to ensure nobody could tamper with anything. The facility was sterile, professional, nothing like the cozy private practice where the first test had been done. Emily sat in a chair, while a phlebotomist prepared to draw blood. Her face was pale, and Nathan could see her hands trembling in her lap. You okay? He asked quietly. No, she said, but I'm here. The blood draw took less than 5 minutes. Eleanor had provided her own sample the day before. Same process, same facility, same witness. They weren't taking any chances this time. Results will take 7 to 10 days, the lab director said. We'll call you the moment we have them, and Miss Carter. She smiled kindly. Whatever the outcome, I hope you find the answers you're looking for. The drive back to Santa Barbara was quiet. Emily stared out the window while Nathan drove, neither of them sure what to say. What do you talk about when everything is on hold? When your entire identity might be about to shift? My mom wants to see you, Nathan said finally. When we get back. If you're willing. Emily was silent for a long moment. I don't know if I can face her. She's sorry. For everything. For investigating you. For the test. For not being honest from the start. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. She just wanted her daughter back so badly that she stopped thinking clearly. I get it, Emily said softly. I do, but that doesn't make it hurt less. They were almost to Santa Barbara when Nathan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his jaw tightened. It's Margaret. Don't answer it. I have to. She doesn't know I'm onto her yet. Better to keep it that way until we have the results. He answered on speaker. Hello, Aunt Margaret. Nathan. Darling. Where are you? I haven't seen you all day. Running errands? I'll be home soon. Is that girl with you, Emily? Nathan and Emily exchanged glances. Why do you ask? No reason. I just heard she'd left town. I was hoping you weren't chasing after her. Eleanor's finally starting to accept reality, and I'd hate to see her hopes raised again for nothing. Nathan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Right. Well, I'll be home for dinner. We can talk then. He ended the call, and Emily saw murder in his eyes. She thinks she won, Emily said quietly. She has no idea what's coming. Back at the mansion, Eleanor was in her study when Nathan knocked. She looked up, and her breath caught when she saw Emily standing behind him in the doorway. Emily, she whispered. You came back. For the test, Emily said. Not unkindly, but not warmly either. We did it this morning, in a federal lab with a witness. Eleanor stood slowly, hope and fear warring on her face. And we wait 7 to 10 days, Eleanor nodded, fighting back tears. Emily, I need to apologize. What I did, investigating you, testing you without being fully honest, it was wrong. You deserved better than that. You deserved the truth from the beginning. Yeah, Emily said. I did. The silence stretched between them, painful and heavy. But I understand why you did it, Emily continued, her voice softer now. If there was even a chance that Mrs. Rose was out there somewhere, still alive, I'd probably do the same thing. So I'm not saying I forgive you yet, but I understand. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. That's more than I deserve. Maybe. But it's what I can give right now. The week that followed was agony. Eleanor barely left her study. Nathan threw himself into documenting every piece of evidence against Margaret. Emily stayed in a hotel in town, not quite ready to return to the mansion, but not willing to run either. And Margaret Margaret went about her daily routine, utterly confident that she'd secured her future, until day 8. When the call came, Nathan answered his phone on the first ring. "This is Nathan Holloway. Mr. Holloway, this is Dr. Patricia Sung from the Federal Testing Facility. I have your results." Nathan's heart stopped, and the genetic analysis shows a 99.98% probability of maternal relationship between Eleanor Holloway's sample and Emily Carter's sample. In layman's terms, Mr. Holloway, Emily Carter is Eleanor Holloway's biological daughter. The phone nearly slipped from Nathan's hand. "You're certain, absolutely certain, there is no doubt. Emily Carter is Clara Holloway." Nathan sat down hard, his legs suddenly unable to support him. 20 years. 20 years of not knowing, of grief and loss and wondering. And now, "Mr. Holloway, are you still there?" Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Dr. Sung. Can you email me the official results? They're already in your inbox. Congratulations, Mr. Holloway. Your sister is alive." After he hung up, Nathan sat in silence for a full minute. Then he stood, grabbed his keys, and drove to Emily's hotel. He knocked on her door. When she opened it, he saw that she already knew. Dr. Sung must have called her too. Emily's face was wet with tears. Her hands were shaking. She looked at Nathan with eyes full of disbelief and joy and terror. "I'm Clara," she whispered. "I'm your sister." "Yeah," Nathan said, his own voice breaking. "Yeah, you are." And then Emily, Clara, collapsed into his arms, sobbing. Nathan held his sister for the first time in 20 years, his own tears mixing with hers, and for a moment, they were just two kids again, the ones who'd been torn apart by a single moment of chaos in a crowded market. "We need to tell Mom," Nathan said when they could finally speak again. Clara nodded, wiping her face. Together, they drove to the mansion in Nathan's car. Eleanor was in the garden, sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. She looked up when she heard their footsteps, and her face went white when she saw them walking toward her. Holding hands, Nathan held out the printed results without saying a word. Eleanor took the paper, read it again. Her hands started shaking so hard the paper fluttered like a trapped bird. "Clara," she whispered, looking at Emily, at her daughter, like she might disappear if Eleanor blinked. "Hi, Mom," Clara said, and Eleanor shattered. She stood and pulled Clara into her arms, holding her so tight it must have hurt, sobbing into her daughter's hair. Clara held her just as tightly. 20 years of not knowing. Finally resolved, Nathan stood watching, his own face wet, as his mother and sister clung to each other in the fading California light. His family was whole again. Almost. There was still one more thing to take care of. They spent that first night in Eleanor's study, the three of them, talking until the early hours of morning. There was so much to say, so many years to bridge, so many questions that finally had answers. Eleanor couldn't stop touching Clara, her hand, her face, her hair, as if she needed constant physical proof that her daughter was real, was here, was alive. Clara didn't pull away. She seemed to need the contact just as much. This confirmation that she belonged to someone, that she'd come from somewhere. "I need to know," Eleanor said around midnight, her voice raw from crying. "What happened that day? How did you end up in Oakland?" Clara, and it was strange, thinking of herself as Clara now instead of Emily, like putting on a name that didn't quite fit yet, shook her head. "I don't remember, I've tried, but there's nothing, Mrs. Rose said. "I wouldn't talk for weeks after she found me, just sat in the corner and cried. She thought maybe I'd been traumatized into silence. The police said you were probably taken," Eleanor said quietly, "that someone grabbed you in the crowd and panicked, maybe realized what they'd done and abandoned you before they got caught. Or maybe I just wandered off and got lost," Clara offered. 5-year-olds aren't exactly known for their survival skills. "Someone could have found me, put me on a bus thinking they were helping, and I ended up in Oakland by accident." "Does it matter?" Nathan asked. "How you got there? I mean, you're here now. That's what counts." "It matters to me," Eleanor said, "because whoever took you, whoever made me lose 20 years with my daughter," her voice turned hard, "they took everything from us." Clara reached for her mother's hand. "They took 20 years, but we have now. We have whatever time is left. That's more than I thought I'd ever have." Eleanor's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I thought you were dead. For so long, I was sure you were dead. And I couldn't even grieve properly because there was always that tiny possibility. That what if. It was torture." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "God, no, don't apologize. None of this is your fault." Eleanor cupped her daughter's face. "You survived. You were loved, Mrs. Rose. I wish I could thank her. I wish I could tell her that she saved my daughter's life." "She knew," Clara said. "In her letter, she asked for forgiveness. I think she knew what she'd taken from you by keeping me. She gave you a life," Eleanor said firmly. "A good life from what you've told me. Yes, I wish I'd had those years, but I'm grateful you weren't alone. I'm grateful someone loved you the way I would have." Nathan had been quiet, just watching them, but now he stood and pulled something from his pocket. The small wooden box. He opened it and took out his ring, the twin star, locked away for 20 years. "I want you to have this," he said, holding it out to Clara. She stared at it. "Nathan, that's yours." "No, they were made as a pair. They belong together. We belong together." He smiled, but his eyes were wet. "I kept it all these years thinking maybe, somehow you'd come back for it, and you did." Clara took the ring, her hands shaking. She held it next to her own, the one Mrs. Rose had kept on her finger all these years. They gleamed in the lamplight. Identical. Perfect. Twin stars, Clara whispered. Inseparable. Nathan finished. The moment was broken by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. All three of them tensed. A knock on the door. "Eleanor, are you still awake?" Margaret's voice. Saccharine sweet. "I saw lights on. Is everything all right?" Eleanor and Nathan exchanged glances. Nathan nodded. "Come in, Margaret," Eleanor called. The door opened and Margaret stepped inside, her face arranged in an expression of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked around the room. Eleanor, Nathan, and then she saw Clara. "Oh," Margaret said, her smile faltering. "The nurse is back. How?" "Unexpected." "Not the nurse," Nathan said quietly. "My sister." Margaret's face went very still. "I'm sorry." "What?" Eleanor stood, drawing herself up to her full height. "We had the DNA test redone, Margaret, in a federal lab, with witnesses and chain of custody documentation. There was no way to tamper with it this time." The color drained from Margaret's face. "Emily Carter is Clara Holloway," Eleanor continued, her voice like steel. "My daughter, Nathan's sister. She's been found after 20 years, and she's home." That's wonderful," Margaret stammered, but there was panic in her eyes now. "I'm so happy for you. What amazing news." "We also know what you did," Nathan said, pulling out his phone. He pulled up the bank records, the lab technician's confession, David Chen's full report, the $50,000 you paid to falsify the first test, the threats you made to keep it quiet. "All of it." Margaret's mask cracked completely, her face twisted into something ugly and desperate. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, we can." Nathan's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Signed confession from the lab tech, bank transfers with your signature. Emails between you and him discussing the arrangement. It's all documented." Margaret looked at Clara with pure hatred now. "You little bitch, you couldn't just disappear again, could you? Had to come back and ruin everything." "That's enough," Eleanor said sharply. "Enough," Margaret laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I've lived in this house for 15 years. 15 years of taking care of you, Eleanor, while you wallowed in your grief. 15 years of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who didn't fall apart. And this is how you repay me, by letting some stranger waltz in and steal my place. Your place." Nathan's voice was dangerous now. "You never had a place, Aunt Margaret. You had access. There's a difference." "She's a con artist." Margaret's voice was rising, getting shrill. "She probably found that ring at a pawn shop and invented this whole story. The DNA doesn't lie." Eleanor cut her off. "Unlike you." Margaret's face contorted with rage. For a moment, Clara thought she might actually attack them, but then the fight seemed to drain out of her. Her shoulders slumped. She looked older suddenly, smaller. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "Pack your things," Eleanor said. "You have until morning to leave, if you're not gone by dawn. I'll have security remove you. And my inheritance. The trust Robert set up. Voided. You tried to defraud this family. You tampered with medical records. You caused intentional emotional distress." Eleanor's voice was cold. "You're lucky we're not pressing criminal charges." Yet, Margaret looked at each of them in turn. Eleanor standing tall and righteous, Nathan with his evidence and his quiet fury, and Clara, the ghost who'd come back to haunt her. "You'll regret this," Margaret said, but there was no conviction in it, just defeat. "The only thing I regret," Eleanor said, "is trusting you. Now get out of my sight." Margaret left without another word. They heard her footsteps retreating down the hallway, then the slam of her bedroom door. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was necessary," Nathan finished. "She tried to destroy our family. She doesn't get to stay." Eleanor sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. "I should have seen it sooner. The way she reacted when I first started suspecting. But I was so wrapped up in my own hope and fear. It's not your fault." "Mom," the word felt strange in Clara's mouth, but also right, natural, like something she'd been practicing her whole life without knowing it. She fooled all of us. They sat in silence for a moment, processing everything that had happened in the last few hours. Then Eleanor smiled, a real smile, the first one Clara had seen from her. "You called me Mom," Clara smiled back. "Yeah, I did." Margaret was gone by dawn, her room stripped bare except for the furniture. She'd left without a word, without a goodbye, slipping out like a thief in the night, which, Eleanor supposed, was exactly what she was. But her departure wasn't enough, not for Nathan. "We need to make this official," he said over breakfast 3 days later. "Legal, binding, public, so there's no question. No room for Margaret or anyone else to contest it later." Eleanor nodded. "I've already called Richard." Richard Morrison was the family's attorney, a sharp-minded man in his 60s who'd handled the Holloway estate for 20 years. He's drawing up the paperwork now. Birth certificate restoration, legal name change documents, inheritance modifications. Clara, who was still getting used to the name, still sometimes thought of herself as Emily, pushed her eggs around her plate. Is all that really necessary, the legal stuff? "I mean, can't we just be a family? We need to protect you," Nathan said. "Protect all of us. Margaret isn't the only one who might come after the Holloway fortune. Once word gets out that you're back, there will be people questioning it, challenging it. We need everything documented, ironclad, indisputable." "He's right," Eleanor said gently. "I know it feels clinical, reducing everything to paperwork and lawyers, but this is how we make sure no one can ever take you from us again." Clara nodded, though she still looked uncomfortable. The truth was, the money terrified her. She'd spent her whole life scraping by on a nurse's salary, and suddenly she was an heiress to a fortune she couldn't even comprehend. It felt wrong somehow, unearned. "There's something else," Nathan said. He glanced at his mother. "We want to hold a family gathering, formal announcement. Invite the extended family, the board members from Dad's company, key members of the Santa Barbara community. Make it public and official that Clara Holloway has returned." "Like a coming-out party?" Clara asked, trying for humor, but landing somewhere near panic. "More like a press conference disguised as a celebration," Nathan said with a slight smile. "I know it sounds overwhelming, but we need to control the narrative before someone else does." Eleanor reached across the table and took Clara's hand. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We can take this as slowly as you need." "No," Clara said, squaring her shoulders. "You're right. We need to do this properly. I'm not good at big social events. Never have been." "You'll be fine," Eleanor said. "We'll be right there with you." The gathering was scheduled for the following Saturday. Richard Morrison worked around the clock to prepare the legal documents. David Chen compiled his full investigation report, and Eleanor called in every favor she had to ensure that the right people who mattered, people with influence, would be there. When Saturday arrived, the mansion was transformed. Caterers moved through the rooms with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the main salon, and slowly, the guests began to arrive. Clara stood in Eleanor's bedroom, staring at herself in the full-length mirror. Eleanor had taken her shopping, and now she wore a simple but elegant navy dress that probably cost more than Clara had made in a month as a nurse. Her hair was styled, her makeup professionally done. She looked like a Holloway. She felt like an imposter. "You look beautiful," Eleanor said from the doorway. She'd been watching her daughter with that expression she'd worn constantly for the past week, like she was afraid Clara might vanish if she looked away. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Clara said. "You look like my daughter." Eleanor came to stand beside her. "I know this is hard, but you belong here, Clara. You always did." A knock on the door. Nathan poked his head in. "Everyone's here." "Richard's ready when you are." Clara took a deep breath. "Okay, let's do this." The main salon fell silent when the three of them entered. Clara felt dozens of eyes on her, heard the whispers starting immediately. She recognized some faces from the society pages: wealthy families, business executives, the kind of people who made decisions that affected thousands of lives. And in the corner, arms crossed, face like thunder, Margaret. "She came," Clara whispered. "Of course she did," Nathan murmured back. She couldn't resist. Probably hoping to cause a scene, Richard Morrison stepped forward, commanding the room's attention with practiced ease. "Thank you all for coming. The Holloway family has asked you here today to witness and celebrate something truly extraordinary. 20 years ago, Clara Holloway disappeared from a market in Los Angeles. Despite extensive searches and investigations, she was never found. Until now." The whispers grew louder. Richard raised his hand for silence. "Through a remarkable series of events, Clara has been found, identified through DNA testing conducted in a federal facility with full documentation and chain of custody. There is no doubt, no question of her identity. Clara Holloway has come home." He gestured to Clara, who stepped forward on shaking legs. Eleanor and Nathan flanked her, a united front. "I know this must seem impossible," Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Believe me, it seems impossible to me too. I spent 25 years not knowing who I was or where I came from. I was raised by a kind woman who found me abandoned and alone. She gave me a good life, a loving home, but she always knew I belonged somewhere else." She held up her hand, showing the ring. "This ring was on my finger when she found me. For years, it was just a pretty piece of jewelry with no meaning, but it turns out it was a breadcrumb leading me back to my real family." Nathan stepped forward and held up his own ring. "Twin stars," he said. "My mother had these made for Clara and me before she disappeared. They were meant to be inseparable, and now, finally, they are again." The room erupted in applause. Clara saw tears on several faces, genuine emotion cutting through the society formality. And then Margaret pushed her way to the front. "This is a fraud," she announced loudly. "That girl is a con artist who somehow got her hands on a ring and convinced Eleanor she's Clara. The real Clara is dead. She's been dead for 20 years. The room went silent. Nathan's face hardened. "That's a serious accusation, Aunt Margaret," he said. "Do you have proof?" "Do you?" Margaret shot back. "DNA can be faked. Results can be bought. I should know." She stopped, realizing what she'd just said. Nathan smiled coldly. "Yes, you should know, since you paid $50,000 to falsify the first DNA test." He pulled out his phone and projected the evidence on the wall. Bank transfers, emails, the lab technician's signed confession. The crowd gasped collectively. "Margaret Holloway attempted to defraud this family," Nathan continued. "She sabotaged medical records to prevent Clara from being recognized. She spread lies and rumors to undermine my mother's credibility. And when that wasn't enough, she bribed a lab technician to falsify genetic testing results." Margaret's face went from red to white. You can't prove..." "It's all here," Richard Morrison said, stepping forward with a thick folder. "Documented, verified, legally admissible. Miss Holloway has already been removed from the family trust and banned from the estate. The only reason she hasn't been criminally charged is because the family wished to handle this matter privately. Until now," Eleanor said quietly. She looked at Margaret with something that might have been pity. "You were family, Margaret. I trusted you, and you betrayed us in the worst possible way." Margaret looked around the room, seeing the judgment on every face. Then she turned and fled, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. "Let her go," Eleanor said, when Nathan started to follow. "She's lost everything that mattered to her. That's punishment enough." Richard cleared his throat. "Now then, I have here the restored birth certificate for Clara Marie Holloway, dated June 15th, 2000, as well as documentation of her legal identity, inheritance rights, and position within the Holloway family trust." He handed the papers to Clara. "Welcome home, Miss Holloway." Officially, the applause this time was thunderous. 3 weeks had passed since the gathering, and life at the Holloway mansion had settled into something resembling normalcy, or at least, Clara thought, a new kind of normal. One where she woke up in a bedroom 3 times the size of her old apartment, where breakfast was prepared by a chef, where her mother hugged her every morning like she was still afraid Clara might disappear. It was strange, wonderful, terrifying. Clara still caught herself thinking of Eleanor as Mrs. Holloway sometimes. Still felt like she was playing a role in someone else's life. But slowly, day by day, the edges were softening. Home was becoming less of a concept and more of a feeling. Nathan had taken a leave of absence from his company in Silicon Valley. "I missed 20 years with my sister," he'd told his board. "I'm not missing another day." He was different now. Lighter, somehow. He laughed more, slept better. The hard edges that success and loss had carved into him were beginning to smooth. "Want to take a walk?" he asked Clara one morning after breakfast. "There's something I want to show you." They walked through the gardens, past the roses and the fountain, to a small grove of trees at the far edge of the property. Hidden among them was a bench, weathered and old, with a brass plaque mounted on the back, "In memory of Clara Marie Holloway. Forever in our hearts, forever missed." Clara's breath caught. She reached out to touch the cold metal, tracing the letters of her own name. "Dad had it installed a year after you disappeared," Nathan said quietly. "Mom used to come here every day, just sit and talk to you like you could hear her. I'd find her here sometimes. Hours later, still talking. What did she say? Everything. What you did that day. What she wished she'd said. How she was sorry." Nathan sat down on the bench. "After Dad died, she stopped coming as much. I think it hurt too badly, but I'd come sometimes, tell you about school, about building my company, about how much I missed having a little sister who'd steal my comic books." Clara sat beside him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry for all the years you lost. All the pain." "Hey, no." Nathan put his arm around her shoulders. "None of this is your fault. You were 5 years old. You didn't choose to disappear. You didn't choose to forget us. Life happened. And it was cruel. And it took 20 years to make it right. But it's right now. That's what matters." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the birds, feeling the California sun warm on their faces. "I want to visit her," Clara said finally. "Mrs. Rose, her grave. I need to thank her. And I need to tell her I'm okay, that I found where I came from. When? Tomorrow, if that's okay. I'll drive you," Nathan said. "Mom will want to come too." The next day, the 3 of them made the drive to Oakland. Mrs. Rose was buried in a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city, under a simple headstone that read, "Rose Catherine Mitchell, 1945-2022. She loved well." Clara knelt in the grass and placed a bouquet of wildflowers against the stone. Eleanor and Nathan stood a respectful distance behind, giving her space. "Hi, Mrs. Rose," Clara whispered. "I'm sorry it took me so long to visit. Things have been complicated." She traced the letters carved into the granite. "You were right. About the ring. It led me home, just like you said it would. I found my mother, my brother, my real name." She laughed wetly. "Turns out I'm rich. Can you believe that? Me, Emily Carter, the girl who counted pennies to buy groceries. I'm a Holloway. I have more money than I know what to do with." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of jasmine. "But that's not the important part. The important part is I have a family again. People who love me, who chose me, just like you did." Clara wiped her eyes. "I know what you did was wrong. Legally, morally. You should have turned me in. Let them find my parents. But Mrs. Rose, if you hadn't kept me, if you hadn't loved me, I don't know if I would have survived. You saved me, in every way that matters. You saved me." She pressed her hand to the stone. "My mom, my birth mom. Eleanor, she wants to thank you. She's here right now. They both are, and they're grateful. We all are. So rest easy. Okay, you don't have to carry guilt anymore. You gave me a beautiful life, and now I get to have another one, with the family I was born to." Eleanor came forward and knelt beside Clara. "Thank you," she said softly to the headstone. "Thank you for loving my daughter when I couldn't. Thank you for keeping her safe. Thank you for the letter that led her back to us. I will never, ever forget what you did for her." Nathan placed his own flowers on the grave. "You were a good mom," he said simply. "She's lucky she had you." They stayed for a while longer, the three of them together in the quiet cemetery, honoring the woman who'd bridged the gap between Emily and Clara, between lost and found, on the drive home. Clara fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from emotion. Eleanor turned in the passenger seat to watch her daughter sleep, that expression of wonder still on her face. "She looks like she did when she was little," Eleanor whispered to Nathan, "when she'd fall asleep in the car coming home from somewhere. That same peaceful expression. She's home now," Nathan said. "Really home." That evening, they gathered in the garden as the sun set over the California hills. The sky was painted in shades of gold and rose and violet, and the first stars were beginning to appear. Eleanor sat between her children on the bench, not the memorial bench in the grove, but a new one they'd installed together near the house. Nathan on one side, Clara on the other, their hands joined. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," Eleanor said, "that this is all a dream, and I'll open my eyes and be alone again." "It's real, Mom," Clara said. "I'm real. I'm here." Nathan pulled out the small wooden box he'd carried for so long. He opened it and took out his ring, the twin star. Clara held out her hand, showing her own. "Together?" Nathan asked. "Together," Clara confirmed. They held their hands side by side, the two rings catching the last rays of sunlight, twin stars, just like they were meant to be, inseparable. Finally, Eleanor looked at her children, both of them, here, whole, alive, and felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Not just hope, not just relief, peace. "You know what your father used to say?" she asked softly. "He'd say that family isn't about never losing each other. It's about finding your way back when you do." "He was right," Nathan said. "Yeah," Clara agreed, leaning her head on her mother's shoulder. "He was." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one above them, as the lights of Santa Barbara began to glow in the distance, as the world grew dark and quiet around them. The past had taken so much, but the present, this moment, these people, this love, was giving it back. "I'm home," Clara whispered, and for the first time in 25 years, she meant it with every fiber of her being. Eleanor kissed her daughter's hair. "Yes, sweetheart.